The morning sun always rises first over my 10-acre farmstead, casting long shadows across fields that have been in my family for generations. This modest plot of land has been my sanctuary for the past 15 years, a place where the rhythms of rural life continue undisturbed by the chaos of the modern world. At least that was true until 3 years ago, when developers purchased the adjacent properties and transformed what used to be completely rural countryside into an upscale planned community called Oak Ridge Estates. Through a bizarre zoning quirk and county redistricting, my farm became technically incorporated into the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association boundaries. The only saving grace was that my agricultural exemptions protected most of my farming activities from their regulations. I was assured this arrangement would be merely a formality with minimal impact on my day-to-day existence. For the first 2 years, that promise held true. Ferdinand, my prized Hereford bull, has been with me for 8 of those 15 years. He grazes peacefully in the front pasture that borders the county road, his massive red and white frame visible to passing cars. Despite his intimidating size, Ferdinand has the temperament of an oversized puppy. Children often stop with their parents to watch him, and he ambles to the fence line to greet them with gentle curiosity. His bloodline is exceptional, and he has sired many award-winning calves over the years. Ferdinand is not just livestock to me. He is the cornerstone of my small breeding operation and a beloved companion. The relationship with my new neighbors started amicably enough. Many of them seemed charmed by the pastoral scene my property provided at the entrance to their manicured subdivision. Some even brought their children specifically to see Ferdinand and the other animals. The monthly HOA meetings were cordial, focusing mostly on community events and minor maintenance issues that did not affect my exempt property. Everything changed when Martin Blackwell was elected HOA president last year. I remember the first time I met him at the community center. He wore pressed khakis and a polo shirt with the collar turned up, scanning my weathered jeans and work boots with poorly disguised disdain. His handshake was firm but brief, as if he feared dirt might somehow transfer from my calloused palms to his manicured fingernails. "I have big plans for elevating the standards around here," Martin announced to me that day, gesturing toward the community entrance that happened to run past my property. First impressions are everything in real estate. His vision for an impeccable, controlled community immediately began to collide with my more traditional way of life. The once cordial monthly meetings grew increasingly tense, filled with pointed comments about property values and community standards that were clearly aimed in my direction. Martin would make sweeping statements about cleaning up eyesores while staring directly at me, though my property was well maintained by any reasonable rural standard. I never imagined my quiet corner of the world would become a battleground between rural tradition and suburban uniformity. But as the seasons changed, it became increasingly clear that Martin Blackwell had set his sights on transforming or removing what he considered to be the one blemish on his perfect community: my farm, my animals, and my way of life. The crisp white envelope bearing the Oak Ridge Estates letterhead has become a dreaded sight in my mailbox. I stand at the end of my gravel driveway, already knowing what awaits inside before I even break the seal. This latest notice marks the 5th formal complaint in 3 months. I unfold the paper and scan the contents with growing frustration. This time, they are citing the height of my storage shed, a structure that has stood unchanged for over a decade before Oak Ridge Estates even existed. The evolution of these letters tells the story of escalating hostility. The first notices were phrased as polite reminders about community standards, with suggestions for improvements. By the third letter, the tone shifted to warnings about potential violations. Now, The language has transformed into thinly veiled threats of fines and legal action if I do not comply with regulations that should not even apply to my agriculturally exempt property. I toss the letter onto the passenger seat of my truck and drive toward town for feed supplies. The muscles in my jaw ache from clenching my teeth, a habit I have developed since Martin Blackwell took control of the HOA. The constant pressure of being under scrutiny has begun to wear on me in ways I never anticipated. Even small tasks around the farm now feel like potential ammunition for my neighbors to use against me. The April HOA meeting remains vivid in my memory. I arrived a few minutes late after finishing evening chores, slipping quietly into a seat at the back of the community center. Martin stood at the podium, laser pointer in hand, projecting photos onto the wall that I recognized with a sinking feeling in my stomach. They were images of my property, taken from various angles that emphasized every imperfection while carefully avoiding the well-maintained aspects. This kind of rustic disarray might be charming to some, he announced to the room of 40 neighbors, sweeping his laser pointer across a photo of my equipment barn. But it drastically impacts surrounding property values and the image we want to project as a premier community. The room was divided in their reactions. Several of the newer residents nodded in agreement, while some of the longer-term neighbors looked uncomfortable with the public shaming. I felt heat rise to my face but remained silent, knowing that any defense would only provide Martin with the confrontation he seemed to crave. In the weeks following that meeting, I made several compromise attempts to maintain peace while preserving my way of life. I repainted the most visible outbuildings, planted decorative shrubs along the road-facing fence line, and even relocated some of the equipment Martin had specifically mentioned to less visible areas of the property. None of these efforts received acknowledgement. Instead, the complaints simply shifted to new targets. The silver Range Rover has become a familiar sight along my fence line. Martin now makes daily slow passes, sometimes stopping completely as he takes photos with his phone. These drive-bys occur at different times, creating the unsettling feeling of being under constant surveillance. The first few times, I waved politely, trying to maintain some semblance of neighborly relations. My greetings were met with stony stares before he drove away. Ferdinand has begun to notice these regular intrusions too. My normally placid bull grows visibly agitated at the sound of Martin's distinctive vehicle, especially when he occasionally taps his horn in what I can only interpret as deliberate provocation. Bulls are creatures of habit who value predictability, and these disruptions to his routine have made Ferdinand increasingly wary of vehicles passing by the fence. Last week, I placed several clearly visible "no honking" signs along my fence, explaining that loud noises disturb my livestock. The signs included a specific reference to bulls being sensitive to sudden sounds. Rather than deterring the behavior, this seems to have encouraged it. Twice since posting the signs, I have heard the distinctive toot of Martin's horn as he passes Ferdinand's pasture, followed by the accelerated growl of his engine as he speeds away. The warning signs are increasingly clear. What began as neighborhood friction is evolving into something more targeted and potentially dangerous. Each night as I complete my final check on the animals, I find myself watching the road with growing concern. Ferdinand stands at the fence line, his massive silhouette outlined against the setting sun, both of us seemingly aware that the peace we once took for granted is slipping away with each passing day. The morning dew still clung to the grass as I hauled feed buckets toward the front pasture. It was barely past sunrise, that golden hour when the world feels fresh and full of possibility. The air carried the sweet scent of alfalfa and wet earth. I had been up since before dawn, moving through my chores with the practiced efficiency of someone who has performed the same routine for years. These early morning moments were usually my favorite part of the day, before the weight of community tensions pressed down on my shoulders. Ferdinand grazed peacefully near the road fence, his massive red-brown form illuminated by the soft early light. Steam rose gently from his back as the sun warmed his hide. He raised his head briefly to acknowledge my approach, then returned to the serious business of breakfast. The pasture stretched approximately 2 acres, but Ferdinand had chosen, as he often did, to graze in the section closest to the county road. I made a mental note to rotate him to the backfield later that day, away from the increasing traffic and stress. The distinctive rumble of a luxury engine broke the morning stillness. My body tensed automatically as I recognized the sound. I turned toward the county road where Martin's silver Range Rover approached at an unusually slow speed. This was hours earlier than his normal drive-by, and something about the deliberate pace of the vehicle sent warning signals through my body. Time seemed to freeze as I watched his window lower and his arm extend toward the steering wheel. Even from this distance, I could see Martin's face clearly enough to recognize the determined set of his jaw. The sharp blast of his horn shattered the morning tranquility like a gunshot. Ferdinand raised his head immediately, his entire body tensing at the unexpected noise. His ears swiveled forward, and his tail straightened, the first warning signs of agitation that any experienced farmer would recognize instantly. The peaceful grazing animal transformed in seconds to an alert, anxious bull assessing a potential threat. Martin honked again, more insistently this time, the sound echoing across the pasture. My heart rate spiked as I dropped the feed buckets and began running toward the fence, waving my arms frantically. Feed scattered across the ground, forgotten in the moment of crisis. "Stop honking, the bull does not like that," I shouted at the top of my lungs, my voice cracking with urgency. "Please stop, you are agitating him." I could see Ferdinand pawing at the ground now, his front hoof dragging across the dirt in clear warning. His massive head lowered slightly, and his nostrils flared as he snorted, all classic signs of a bull preparing to charge. The fence between Ferdinand and the road suddenly seemed inadequate, a flimsy barrier between 2,000 pounds of agitated animal and whatever was threatening him. A smirk crossed Martin's face as our eyes met across the distance. He deliberately maintained eye contact with me as he laid on the horn continuously now, the noise blaring across the previously peaceful landscape. The sound seemed to physically push against me as I ran, my boots slipping slightly in the dew-covered grass. Ferdinand pawed the ground more vigorously, his nostrils flaring as he lowered his head further, warning signs any farmer would recognize immediately. The muscles in his powerful shoulders bunched visibly even from a distance. I was still 30 yards away, too far to intervene directly. "Martin, stop! He will charge!" My voice broke with the force of my shouting, but the horn continued blaring, drowning out my warnings. Before I could reach the fence, 2,000 pounds of agitated bull charged forward with shocking speed that belied his massive size. The wooden fence posts trembled but held as Ferdinand crashed against them, the entire structure flexing under the impact. But then Ferdinand found the gap at the cattle gate, a section designed for easy access that was secured only with a chain and hook. In a terrifying display of power, he burst through onto the county road, the chain snapping like thread against his momentum. Ferdinand charged directly at the source of his torment, moving with the single-minded purpose of an animal defending its territory. The distance between bull and vehicle closed in seconds. The sickening crunch of metal filled the air as his massive head connected with the driver's side door. The impact pushed the entire vehicle sideways several feet, tires skidding on the asphalt. I froze in horror, watching the scene unfold as if in slow motion. Martin's expression transformed from smugness to horror in an instant as his Range Rover tilted, teetered on the edge of the drainage ditch, then slid down the embankment with Ferdinand still pushing against it like an enraged freight train. The bull's momentum carried both animal and vehicle several more feet before Ferdinand finally backed away, shaking his massive head as if clearing it. The Range Rover settled at an awkward angle, half submerged in the drainage ditch, its pristine silver finish now bearing a massive, bull-sized dent across the driver's side door. Steam hissed from the damaged radiator, mixing with the dust still hanging in the air. The horn, which had been blaring continuously, fell suddenly silent, leaving an eerie quiet broken only by the ticking of the damaged vehicle and Ferdinand's heavy breathing. I stood frozen, my mind struggling to process the disaster that had unfolded in mere seconds. Ferdinand turned away from the damaged vehicle, seemingly satisfied that the threat had been neutralized, and began ambling back toward the broken gate. My momentary relief that he was calming down was immediately replaced by the realization that this incident was just the beginning of a much larger battle. My heart pounded in my chest as I vaulted over the fence and ran toward the overturned vehicle. The surreal scene before me felt like something from a movie rather than my quiet country road. Ferdinand had already backed away, returning to the pasture entrance, still agitated but no longer charging. He stood there watching, his sides heaving with exertion and residual anxiety. The Range Rover lay tilted at a 45-degree angle in the drainage ditch, its pristine silver finish now bearing a massive bullhead-shaped dent in the driver's door. The impact had crumpled the metal inward, and spiderweb cracks spread across the window. Water from the ditch seeped into the undercarriage, creating a slow hiss as it hit the hot engine components. "Martin, are you hurt?" I called out, genuine concern overriding our animosity in this moment of crisis. I could see movement inside the vehicle, which provided some relief that he was at least conscious. Martin struggled to push. The door opened against gravity and the damaged frame. When the door finally gave way with a metallic groan, he half climbed, half fell out of the vehicle. His typically immaculate appearance was disheveled, with dirt smudging his khaki pants and polo shirt. A small cut on his forehead trickled blood, but he appeared to have avoided serious injury. The relative calm lasted only seconds before he exploded in rage. "You are finished. Your animal is a menace that needs to be put down," he screamed, his face crimson with fury as he pointed toward Ferdinand. Spittle flew from his mouth with each word. "I could have been killed. Do you understand? Killed." "You deliberately provoked him," I responded, struggling to keep my own voice level. "There are signs clearly posted about not honking. I warned you multiple times to stop." "I was just driving by. That beast attacked without any provocation," Martin shouted, his voice cracking. He pulled out his phone and began frantically tapping the screen. "I am calling the sheriff, animal control, my lawyer, and the entire HOA board. By tonight, that animal will be destroyed, and by next month you will be bankrupt from the lawsuits." True to his word, Martin made call after call, his voice growing increasingly dramatic with each retelling of the incident. I stepped away to secure Ferdinand back in the pasture and repair the broken gate as best I could with temporary measures. My hands trembled slightly as the adrenaline began to wear off, leaving me with a growing dread about what would follow. Sheriff Davis arrived within minutes, his cruiser followed closely by a county animal control truck. Both vehicles parked carefully away from Ferdinand's line of sight. Sheriff Davis was a reasonable man who had served the county for over 20 years. He knew me and my farm well enough to approach the situation with professional neutrality rather than immediate judgment. Martin immediately rushed toward the officers, launching into his version of events before they could even exit their vehicles fully. That dangerous animal attacked my vehicle completely unprovoked. I want it seized and destroyed immediately. He pointed frantically at Ferdinand, who now stood calmly inside the repaired pasture gate, watching the commotion with what almost looked like satisfaction on his bovine features. The contrast between Martin's frenzied state and Ferdinand's composed demeanor was striking. He deliberately provoked Ferdinand by honking repeatedly at him, I explained to Sheriff Davis when I could finally get a word in. I have signs clearly posted about not honking near the livestock. I shouted warnings that he ignored. This was not unprovoked. That is absolutely false, Martin interjected, his voice rising again. I was simply driving past at a normal speed when this uncontrolled beast attacked without warning or reason. There are property damage and safety regulations specifically addressing dangerous animals. I demand action immediately. The animal control officer approached the fence cautiously, observing Ferdinand with professional interest. He seems calm enough now, she noted. No signs of aggressive behavior toward me. Of course not. He is only aggressive when he wants to be. That makes him even more dangerous and unpredictable, Martin insisted. The entire narrative shifted when a county delivery service truck pulled up to the growing assembly of vehicles. Jenny Hopkins, who had been making deliveries in our area for years, approached Sheriff Davis with purpose in her step. I have video of the whole thing, she said quietly, holding up her truck's dashboard camera. I was making a delivery down the road and recorded everything. I was coming around the bend when I saw what happened. Martin's expression crumbled visibly as the sheriff reviewed the footage on Jenny's small screen. Even from where I stood, I could see the clear sequence of events. Martin slowing deliberately beside Ferdinand's pasture, the repeated honking, my frantic warnings, and then the inevitable charge. The video evidence contradicted Martin's version of events entirely. This changes things considerably, Sheriff Davis said, looking up from the screen. Mr. Blackwell, would you like to revise your statement about what happened here? Martin's face flushed an even deeper red, but he remained silent, his jaw working soundlessly before he turned and walked away to make another phone call with sharp, angry movements. Despite the video evidence supporting my account, that evening a courier delivered an ominous envelope to my door. Inside was a formal notice of legal action from both the Oak Ridge Estates HOA and Martin Blackwell personally. The document demanded compensation for damages to Martin's vehicle, medical expenses for alleged injuries, and livestock containment violations. It also included a formal request to the county for Ferdinand to be declared a dangerous animal and removed from the property. As I set the papers down on my kitchen table, I realized this incident had escalated far beyond a damaged vehicle. This was now a fight for Ferdinand's life, and my right to continue my way of life on land that had been in my family for generations. The law office of Miller and Sons occupied a modest converted farmhouse on the edge of town, specializing in agricultural law and rural property disputes. The building itself seemed to embody the principles it defended: traditional, unpretentious, but solidly built to withstand the tests of time and changing fashions. Tom Miller greeted me with a firm handshake as I entered his wood-paneled office 3 days after the incident. I have been expecting to hear from you, he said, gesturing toward a comfortable chair across from his desk. News travels fast in small towns, especially when it involves a bull versus a Range Rover. Tom was a third-generation attorney with calloused hands that revealed his own farming background. He was that rare breed of legal professional who understood both the letter of the law and the practical realities of rural life. He reviewed the footage from Jenny's dashboard camera and my documentation of previous interactions with Martin with careful attention. "They have deep pockets but a weak case," he explained, spreading papers across his oak desk that had likely seen generations of similar disputes. "The video shows clear provocation, and your warning signs about not honking were plainly visible. No reasonable person could argue Ferdinand acted without significant human instigation. But they are still pressing forward with demands that he be destroyed," I said, the words catching slightly in my throat. The thought of losing Ferdinand felt like contemplating the loss of a family member. "Legally speaking, a bull responding to direct provocation is not the same as an animal with dangerous proclivities," Tom assured me. "But we need to be prepared for a fight. Martin Blackwell strikes me as a man unaccustomed to losing, and he has the HOA resources behind him." Outside the legal proceedings, the community fractured along clear lines in the days following the incident. Many of the newer residents rallied behind Martin, repeating talking points about safety concerns and property values that sounded directly copied from HOA meeting minutes. I received disapproving glares at the local grocery store and noticed cars slowing to stare disapprovingly at my property. What surprised me were the unexpected allies who emerged from the woodwork. Several longtime neighbors whom I had only known through casual waves and brief greetings began appearing at my door with casseroles, baked goods, and offers of support. These visits often came with stories that painted a disturbing pattern. Alina Richards, who served as HOA secretary and had always seemed a quiet, reserved woman, arrived with an apple pie and revelations that changed my understanding of the situation entirely. "Martin did something similar in Westlake Estates before moving here," she confided as we sat at my kitchen table. "He pushed out 3 homeowners through targeted enforcement until they sold at losses. Then mysteriously, those same properties were purchased by an investment group and flipped for significant profits." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, surprised by her candor. Alina's eyes narrowed slightly. "Because I have watched him systematically target residents who do not fit his vision for the community. Your farm is the most visible problem in his eyes, but you are not the only one suffering. The difference is, you might be the first one with enough evidence and support to stand up to him successfully." The financial pressure began mounting as my legal bills grew. Each day brought new certified letters and formal complaints, each requiring documentation and response. The emotional toll weighed even heavier as I found myself constantly checking on Ferdinand, worried about his safety, despite the additional security measures I had implemented around the property. One evening, unable to sleep, I began researching Martin Blackwell online. What I discovered confirmed Alina's warnings and revealed a troubling pattern spanning multiple communities across 2 counties. Before each move, there was a similar pattern of targeted enforcement, property devaluation, and eventual acquisition by shell companies that careful tracking revealed had connections to Martin's real estate investment portfolio. The certified letter that arrived that afternoon hit me with particular force. It announced an emergency HOA meeting scheduled for Friday evening, just 9 days after the incident. The agenda contained a single item: vote on Resolution 47B, mandatory removal of dangerous animals from community properties. I placed the notice on my kitchen table next to the growing stack of legal bills and mortgage statements. The weight of the situation pressed on me physically. For the first time since inheriting this land from my grandfather, I found myself contemplating real estate listings on my laptop, wondering if 15 years of memories and hard work would end because of one man's wounded pride and a bull who simply defended himself against provocation. As darkness fell, I walked out to Ferdinand's pasture. He ambled over to the fence, nudging my outstretched hand with his massive head. "What are we going to do, big guy?" I whispered, scratching behind his ears. The bull gazed back with liquid brown eyes that seemed to hold more understanding than many humans I had encountered lately. The Oak Ridge Estates Community Center had never been so crowded. Folding chairs filled every available space as neighbors filed in for the emergency meeting, creating an obvious physical division in the room. The newer residents in pressed khakis and polo shirts clustered near the front where Martin stood arranging his presentation materials, their conversations a low buzz of anticipation. Meanwhile, longtime community members and rural property owners formed a protective semicircle around me in the back, their presence a silent statement of solidarity. The room smelled of coffee and tension. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everyone in an unflattering glow that seemed to accentuate the divisions between us. Through the windows, I could see the sun beginning to set, painting the sky in dramatic oranges and reds that contrasted with the sterile interior of the meeting space. Tom Miller sat beside me, his weathered leather briefcase containing our documentation and legal preparations. Alina Richards had positioned herself strategically at the secretary's table, her posture rigid and her expression unreadable as she prepared to record the meeting minutes. The table at the front held a projector, a laptop, and a neat stack of papers that Martin occasionally rearranged with precise, controlled movements. At exactly 7 o'clock, Martin called the meeting to order with obvious confidence, tapping the gavel with practiced authority. He wore a navy blazer over a crisp white shirt, the small butterfly bandage on his forehead the only visible reminder of the incident. His voice was steady and professional as he addressed the packed room. "Thank you all for attending this important emergency session," he began, scanning the room with an expression of grave concern. "As many of you know, a dangerous incident occurred last week involving an uncontrolled animal attacking a vehicle on our community roads." Martin clicked a remote, and enlarged photographs of his damaged Range Rover appeared on the wall behind him. The images were clearly selected to maximize the apparent damage, taken from angles that made the dent look particularly severe. Several gasps rose from the front section of the audience. "This dangerous animal poses an ongoing threat to our community," he declared, his voice steady and practiced. "Our bylaws clearly state that no dangerous animals may be kept within association boundaries. This resolution before you today is not personal, but about the safety of every resident and visitor to Oak Ridge Estates." For the next 20 minutes, Martin presented his case with the polished delivery of someone accustomed to winning arguments. He showed close-up images of the dent, medical reports detailing his minor injuries, and carefully selected excerpts from the HOA regulations highlighted in alarming red. Not once did he mention the honking or the provocation. When my turn came to speak, I felt the weight of every gaze in the room. My hands trembled slightly as I approached the front, connecting my laptop to the projector with Tom's steady assistance. The room fell silent as the screen transitioned from Martin's carefully curated images to Jenny's dashboard camera footage. "Before I say anything else, I would like you all to see exactly what happened," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "This footage comes from a delivery truck that happened to be passing by during the incident." The high-definition video played without commentary. The footage clearly showed Martin's Range Rover slowing deliberately beside my fence, the window lowering, and the repeated, prolonged honking despite my visible no honking signs. My frantic running and warnings were clearly captured, as was Martin's dismissive response and continued provocation. The room remained completely silent as they watched Ferdinand's predictable reaction and the subsequent collision. As you can see, I continued as the video ended, this was not an unprovoked attack. Ferdinand responded as any bull would to deliberate harassment. The signs warning against honking were clearly posted, and my verbal warnings were ignored. The room remained silent for several long moments before Elena Richards stood up from her seat at the secretary's table, surprising everyone. I moved to enter into rec. Or these previous complaints about selective enforcement, she announced, approaching the table with a thick folder. Her voice, usually soft and deferential in meetings, carried unexpected authority. These documents show a pattern of targeted harassment against specific homeowners who do not conform to certain aesthetic preferences. Martin's face darkened. "That is not relevant to the matter at hand, Elena," he said sharply. "We are discussing a dangerous animal incident, not HOA enforcement policies." "I believe they are directly connected," Elena countered, standing her ground. "The context of ongoing harassment is essential to understanding the events that led to this incident." To my surprise, one by one, homeowners I barely knew rose to describe similar patterns of targeted harassment. An elderly couple described receiving daily violation notices about their garden gnomes. A young family detailed fines for having a basketball hoop that had been approved by the previous board. Each story built upon the last, creating a damning picture of systematic intimidation. Martin repeatedly tried to redirect the conversation back to Ferdinand, his composure cracking slightly as more residents spoke against him. His knuckles whitened around the gavel he held, though he did not use it to interrupt the speakers. Tom Miller then took the floor, explaining in measured tones that my agricultural exemptions predated the HOA incorporation and superseded many of their regulations according to county law. He projected copies of the original zoning documents and property agreements that had been in place when Oak Ridge Estates was developed. "Furthermore," he added, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone completely confident in their legal position, deliberately provoking a farm animal and then demanding its destruction constitutes a bad faith action that no court would uphold. The video evidence would be admissible in any legal proceeding. When the vote finally came on Resolution 47B, the tension in the room was palpable. Martin called for a show of hands, his voice tight with controlled anger. The result sent shock waves through the room, 38 against, 12 in favor. The resolution to force the removal of Ferdinand had failed decisively. Martin's face flushed deep crimson as he slammed his gavel down with excessive force. "This meeting is adjourned," he announced abruptly, gathering his materials with jerky movements. He brushed past me without eye contact as homeowners surrounded me with handshakes and supportive comments. As the crowd dispersed into the parking lot, I stood momentarily stunned by the outcome. The community I had feared was turning against me had instead risen to defend not just Ferdinand and me, but apparently their own vision of what neighborhood governance should be. Tom Miller clasped my shoulder firmly. "Round one goes to the bull," he said with a slight smile. "But Martin Blackwell does not strike me as a man who accepts defeat graciously. Be prepared for round two." The weeks following the failed resolution brought unexpected peace to my farm. The constant stream of HOA violation notices stopped arriving, and neighbors I had barely spoken to before the incident now waved or stopped to chat when passing by. Children again appeared at the fence line to visit Ferdinand, who had regained his placid demeanor now that the stress of constant surveillance had diminished. Martin, however, pursued his personal lawsuit with increased vigor, demanding substantial damages for his vehicle and claimed injuries. He avoided community spaces where we might encounter each other, but his legal filings grew more aggressive and expansive. Each new document included additional claims of emotional distress, lost work productivity, and even alleged diminished property values due to living near a known dangerous animal. The legal discovery process became his undoing when Tom Miller uncovered a pattern of similar conflicts spanning 3 previous communities. Through diligent investigation and cooperation from contacts in neighboring counties, we obtained court records showing Martin had been involved in similar disputes with other homeowners who did not fit his vision of community standards. More damaging were the financial records that revealed a disturbing pattern. Former neighbors came forward with sworn statements about targeted harassment campaigns that forced them to sell their properties below market value, only to have those same properties later purchased through shell companies linked to Martin's real estate investments. The paper trail connected Martin to at least 7 properties acquired through this method, each showing significant profits when resold months later. He is not just a controlling HOA president, Tom explained during one of our meetings. He has been using his position to manipulate property values for personal gain. Facing mounting evidence and potential countersuits for harassment and fraudulent business practices, Martin agreed to a settlement conference 6 months after the incident. The meeting took place in a sterile conference room at the county courthouse, with attorneys present for both sides. Martin looked significantly older than he had at the HOA meeting, the strain of the ongoing legal battle evident in the new lines around his eyes and mouth. He avoided direct eye contact throughout the proceedings, speaking only to his attorney in hushed tones. The settlement terms were more favorable than I had dared hope. Martin agreed to drop all claims, resign from the HOA board effective immediately, and pay my legal costs. In exchange, I would not pursue further legal action regarding his past behavior or business practices. The document was signed with minimal discussion, Martin's signature an angry scrawl across the bottom of the page. The following spring brought new growth to both my pastures and the community. Under Aliner's leadership as interim HOA president, the association adopted new bylaws that better balanced suburban aesthetics with respect for the area's agricultural heritage. The community newsletter now featured a section celebrating the rural aspects of our location, rather than treating them as elements to be controlled or eliminated. I invested in reinforced fencing around the entire property perimeter, building stronger gates and boundaries that would prevent any future incidents. The work was expensive but necessary, funded partly by the legal settlement and partly by neighbors who volunteered labor and materials in a weekend community project that brought together residents from both sides of the previous divide. Ferdinand remained a fixture in the front pasture, occasionally raising his head to watch passing vehicles with what I swear looks like a knowing expression. Drivers now slow respectfully when